What's up, horror fans? It's Danny from the Lasercast alongside Pete, as always. And we are joined once again by a friend of the channel and somebody who has given us literal hours, almost a full day at this point, of horror content. David Weiner, welcome back. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's spooky season. I've got my themed shirt because it's important to me. I'm doing really great. I mean, I can't complain. We got really real cool movie to talk about, and it's the most wonderful time of the year, as you guys know.
It absolutely is. I even said to Pete, it's getting to the point where it's getting tiring as a horror movie fan with just how much content is available just this October between Chucky and Hellraiser and Midnight Club and Halloween Ends is coming out, and there's Guillermo del Toro has a show at the end. It's very, very tiring. It's been but in a great way.
I'm excited to see Guillermo's entry. I've been waiting for that. That's going to be great.
So, David Weiner, you have In Search of Darkness parts 1 and 2. You had a wonderful science fiction version of In Search of Tomorrow, which was fantastic. 5 hours of 80s sci-fi. And now you are back with us again today to talk about In Search of Darkness 3. So, let's just start right there. Tell us all about the upcoming documentary and tell us, the fans, what we can do for that.
Wow, what can you do for it? I think checking out In Search of Darkness Part 1 and Part 2 is a bit of a prerequisite if you're a horror fan. These days you could catch it on Shudder, but you can't get a physical copy of it. It's very, very, very hard to come by. The demand for another installment has been almost deafening from the people who have really appreciated Part 1, Part 2. You guys are part of that chorus. And here with us at Creator VC, on behalf of our very tight-knit team and Robin Block, who's our CEO, we heard the deafening roar, and he said, we got to make another. And so what's different this time around is that sort of a twofold thing. One, we're going into a more eclectic territory of shot on video, straight to video fare, that when we were walking through the video stores of our youth, it was the dusty shelves and the bottom shelves of material where the real exploitation stuff was, that we were like, Mom, Dad's not looking, I'll grab a pen, I'll put it under Bambi, and I'll put it next to, Dead Poet Society, and it'll be good. No one's going to notice that I got this really ridiculous title. It's kind of like that, but the majority of, I'm going to correct myself, not the majority, of all the movies that are in Search of Darkness Part 3 have been chosen by you guys.
Oh, cool.
Not only the Lasercast, but the chorus that I'm talking about of backers, of horror fans who've loved these movies. We wanted to incorporate everyone's direction, and our trajectory would follow what you guys wanted. So we had a survey where you guys filled in all the movies that you wish you could see for Part 3. You guys even had a poll that you voted on, and we kind of got those ultimately the top 50. We didn't want to reveal actual answers so that you guys would have some surprises. But you guys dictated what this movie is about, and so this is your movie. And it made my job easier, because I was like, this is great. There's so many amazing titles that you guys have all suggested. Just diving through each and every one, seeing who's available to talk about it, who was on camera or behind camera, who's an expert about it. What new faces can we bring for a new installment? 50 new faces. It's really great. So I'll just stop there. I know you guys got a taste of it as well. I know you guys got to see a little bit.
We did, yes. You said the word surprises. So I just want to ask you, was there a movie in particular? I'm not going to ask you to name all the movies that are in there. Of course, we want to be surprised. But was there one specific movie that leapt out at you as a fan choice where you were like, wow, I can't believe I have to include this 80s horror movie in the documentary?
You mean have to or get
Oh,
to include?
get to.
Yes. Weirdly enough, Oliver Stone's The Hand. For some reason, that is something I saw on cable when I was young, and that titillated and confused and distorted my mind. And I've never been able to get out of it, get it out of my head. And I always wanted to include it, but I just didn't feel it was right for part one. And part two, I got very caught up with a lot of other choices. And I was like, this is still sitting here, and it's a crime if I'm not going to put the hand in Search of Darkness Part 3. In fact, one of my crowning moments, because I've spoken to many a celebrity and star in my career, going back to my Entertainment Tonight days, I got to sit down with Oliver Stone to talk about JFK and the box set that they were releasing, and he wrote this insane book about the history of the United States. And before we talked about all of that stuff, I said, I must tell you, out of all the things you've done, I'm a huge fan of The Hand. And he's like, oh my God, really? You're going way back with that. Thank you very much. He was like genuinely touched. I probably was the only guy who like singled out as to liking The Hand. For those who don't know about The Hand, it stars Michael Caine as a cartoonist who, you need your hands. It's like a piano player. If you don't have your hands, especially if you're a righty or a lefty and you make cartoons, if you lose your livelihood, you're in big trouble. That's all I'll say about The Hand. And there's your answer.
That reminded me of a couple of years ago at New York Comic-Con. I got to sit at a press table with Jennifer Connelly, and everybody was talking to her about how much they loved her work. She's an Oscar winner and this. And all I could say to her was, before my question about Snowpiercer, can I just tell you how much I love Phenomena? And she was like, oh my God, that was so long ago, but it was gross. Like that was her one comment. It was gross. And I was like, yes, it was. But
she had to work with bugs and a killer chimpanzee and Donald Pleasance.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I just have to interject real quick that's the kind of stuff that I think talent that is known for big things, when you go to that deep cut that is just part of their resume, it brings them back to whatever that memory is, but it's not so common. And I think a lot of times they appreciate just the fact that you know them more than for their greatest hits.
Yeah. So, you said there's a whole bunch of new faces, and one face that I was introduced to watching the clip that you shared with us was Ruben Galindo Jr. And so I know that your goal was to incorporate foreign films as well. I'm actually not familiar with his works at all. And so you cover one of his films at one point in this documentary, right?
Mm-hmm. Actually, we cover, I don't know how much I want to spoil. But there's more than one. And okay. We were happy to go to Mexico City and talk to him. And these days he's doing reality television, but he has a rich history, not only of doing, cutting his teeth in the mid to the late 80s on 80s movie cult films. But his dad was a filmmaker too, and used to do like luchador movies like El Santo. And so he has an infectious laugh and an absolutely enthusiastic outlook on his early work, and was very kind and more than pleased to sit down with us. And that's one of the things that I'm very proud of to include in Search of Darkness 3. It's kind of like when we went to Japan and got Shinya Tsukamoto for part 2 to talk about Tetsuo, the Iron Man, It's very cool to just go beyond the borders and get the filmmakers who made these films that are very, very fringe, but super cool, and just get their perspective on it years and decades later.
Yeah. And I noticed that when he was talking about his film, he also had Gigi Saul Guerrero in there too. And, I don't think she was in the other 2 installments, right? Of In Search of Darkness.
No, she's a new face. She's a new perspective, talking about the films that she appreciates. And as a director herself in the horror genre, she draws upon a lot of this material, and so I thought it was an important She was a fresh face and an important perspective to add to the conversation this time around.
Yeah, she brings a lot to the table. Like I thought that she was really great on 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments on
Mhm.
Shudder. And I was wondering, have you caught that yet, or have you been watching that?
I've seen a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like, how do you feel kind of compare with the rankings of that, and then like the things that are on your list?
Well, first of all, it's similar yet different is all I could say.
Right.
We're in that's encapsulating moments. A lot of people talk about that. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong now. It was the 100 greatest moments. Everybody knows it. Who put
Bravo?
that out?
Is that the Bravo one?
Bravo. Bravo's like 100 greatest horror films, whatever it was called. Apologies, it's just not. It's been so long, but that was often a comparison to In Search of Darkness. People say, well, it's kind of like that. But what's different about our film or trio of films now is that we're focused very specifically on a very particular decade of explosive cinema. And the influence that had on further cinema is indelible. And you know, this is just an exploration of that time period with the overall context of politics, socio-political, cultural elements on the films, and vice versa in terms of the zeitgeist capturing all this stuff. But it's not about the moments; it's about the movies and it's about the movement. And so, arguably, that's different. Format, on that show is great. It's very similar and it's very comfortable. And I think, if anything, just lastly to talk about it, in comparison, if you can compare the movies, I see them as very different, but there's an obvious connection and similarity. But what that is overall is a celebration of a genre that we love and why it means so much to all of us, and why, whether it's a moment or a movie or a movement, it's all an important thing in terms of people like us spreading the word about cinema, and fringe cinema and impactful cinema that may be a little off the beaten path.
It's interesting. You talked about socio-political things. One of the things I've loved so much in parts 1 and 2 are the chapters in between the years, and how you dive into 80s issues, and it's getting very things, history tends to repeat itself, and
Yeah.
we're starting to come back around to some of that fervor that was around. And in this 20 plus minute clip that you let Pete and I see, one of the scenes, if I could mention it,
Sure.
is about the satanic panic of the 80s. And I love that you went from the satanic panic, and it was in there with heavy metal music and the Supreme Court, the court hearings in Congress with D. Snyder and Zappa. And then you also had Dungeons and Dragons and that, and it made me think about like Stranger Things, and how Stranger Things, as a show being set in the 80s, is showing those especially this last season, if you saw it, really brought all of those issues to the forefront. And it does feel like we're kind of going back culturally into that kind of phase. So, is there, how do you feel, kind of reliving these things from the 80s, but then also seeing them kind of coming back the way they are right now?
I made a very concerted effort to throw in a TV guide ad for Mazes and Monsters, an early movie starring Tom Hanks. And I remember watching that because I was into D&D. I was into Dungeons and Dragons. And much like Stranger Things, D&D is just a fantasy role-playing game where you use your imagination. But there was one story about this one kid who kind of lost their mind and, thought could not differentiate the reality between fantasy and reality when he was playing D&D in college. And that became a movie. And I remember watching that movie on TV, expecting more Dungeons and Dragons than depressing people with psychological issues. And I remember thinking to myself, how in the world is this even being swept up as something that's dangerous to children. I mean, we're indoors. We're not doing drugs. We're not drinking. We're not driving. We're battling orcs in our mind. You know, how dangerous can this be unless we're, you know, we swinging swords at each other? I suppose it's just silly. I remember being part of that era, and I was too young to recognize the fervor over it. I just remember it was kind of everywhere, where people were worried about, even in the wake of the 70s, with, you know, going back to Rosemary's Baby, and then the momentum of The Exorcist and The Omen, and next thing you know, demonic worship, and we're looking at our Hotel California album, and you say, look at the church on there. There's three windows. They have, you know, 6 panes in each, and you just can't tell. And it's 666. And if you look closely in the middle, there's the head of the satanic, you know, church, the Church of Satan, which wasn't true at all. But we you know, try and inspect and find these things on the albums, and play our albums backwards to try and find these satanic messages, just because the cacophony in the media was saying that this is something that's happening, you know. But I remember thinking to myself, whether it's a horror movie, whether it's D&D, whether it's music, my parents were not caught up in the hysteria. They knew I was safe and sane and could make my own decisions about all this stuff. They kept an eye on me, you know, and it's the squeaky wheel is all I could say, you know. Yeah. So you know, I think you know where I'm going with this, but just recently, with a woman who watched Hocus Pocus 2 on Disney Plus and went on a tirade that you know, witches eat babies and devil worship is coming through the television. Beware, beware, beware. You don't know what's really going into our children's heads. It's one person who's a little bit hysterical about this, but the rest of us can easily differentiate the reality. And if her kids can't, then she should turn off that television, you know. And but everyone picked it up because it was a ridiculous story, because it gets clicks. And that's really what it kind of comes down to. You know, the things we really need to worry about is governments that decide, local governments that decide libraries should be burning and schools should be banning books. Burning is next. But banning all these insane titles, it's an absolute hysteria that people are happily to get swept up with if it matches their political vocal slant. And I won't pick sides or say anything more about that. All I'm going to say is that history absolutely does repeat itself, and we all have to be knowledgeable and aware and read books and know where our material is coming from when we read a headline or click on a headline that's questionable about all of this stuff. Understand what the agenda is from the headline that we're clicking on. And you know, we're in choppy waters is all I could say. And the movies in the 80s and the movies of today, especially in the horror genre, reflect that. And we all just need to be alert and aware, because we all need more alerts, right? You need to be alert.
Mm-hmm. I love in the section that you sent us how the horror community seemed to like take it as a challenge in the 80s, and like an entire subgenre of horror in the 80s of like rock and roll horror came out, and you have like Black
in reaction to all this nonsense, they're like, bring it on, let's get even more ridiculous.
Yeah, and like a movie like Trick or Treat or Black Roses can exist as just a strict commentary, like a clapback against those.
Trick or Treat, very much so. I highly recommend people go out and check out Trick or Treat, and it's a very great encapsulation of some of the insanity and hysteria of the satanic panic at the time, and is not so far from the truth today as well.
Yeah.
And highly entertaining. And it was very cool because we covered Trick or Treat this time around, and we brought in the star, Ragman himself, Mark Price, to talk to us and what it was like making that film. And some guy named Gene Simmons, who is in that film as well, talks about being in it. And it's just very cool to have the people who were there share their perspective so many years later.
Yeah, it's funny because like you mentioned that Hotel California and having Anton LaVey on the cover. I'm a little creeped out because this is like the third time this week where that cover's been referenced for me, and I'm like, whoa, okay, I'm getting freaked out here.
The third time in 666
That's
333. It's all I'm just. I was watching a vintage. I do not know the title, but it was Starlog. They had a couple releases. One was about Tom Savini and his special makeup effects, Scream Greats, I believe it was called. And part 2 was really all about the demonic wave that we were talking about now. It really dialed into that satanic panic, and it spent a lot of time with Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. And I remember seeing that years ago, being scared, and wow, they crossed the threshold and spent time with these guys. Weren't they scared for their lives while they were filming these people? They worship Satan. Maybe Satan's around the corner. Something's going to happen. Years later, watching this again, I could see that those guys were just relishing an opportunity to just make a farce out of all of this. And it's just like you could choose anything. They chose Satan, but anything that's a pushback against extreme religion to get a reaction and to get some attention, that, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but that was the perception I got this time around.
Yeah. Well, it's just so great because you have this time capsule, and I kind of remember that satanic panic and just that fear, especially when you got to that was Tipper Gore at one point in the clip as
Tipper
well,
Gore
right?
was
DMRC. Yeah.
Talking about
she was pushing about the music, and the music labels and
right.
So
and so like what's really interesting about that time period is I remember that as a kid, I especially remember the pushback against music and then getting that rating on an album, right? But as we talk about kind of history coming full circle, nowadays it feels almost like music and film isn't held under such a lens as like just political issues themselves are what people really talk about and go after. Do you find that there's any media in particular that they really go after nowadays? I was thinking maybe video games. You mentioned books before.
Books are, banning books is trendy right now this year. Shockingly. And if you look at the titles of some of the books, it's just it's erasing. It's an effort to erase history and not and rewrite history for certain individuals who want to shy away from negative depictions of their agenda. That being said, video games, I think, were a target a little while ago, but I think not so much now. Same thing with horror movies. Horror movies aren't a target right now at all.
Right.
Maybe Hocus Pocus too.
Right.
But I think right now everyone is I think woke is the target. Whatever woke means to you.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what woke means to me. Woke means paying attention to other people's considerations and walks of life, and live and let live. But it's declared woke if it's aggressively declaring you need to give me my my agency. And sometimes it's a little more aggressive than people were comfortable with, and they push back. And I try and shy from conversations like this because I really do like to bring it around to it's entertainment and escapism, because that's how I see it. I really see all this stuff. I mean, I live my life daily where if I want to just enjoy some escape, I put on fantasy, sci-fi, horror, anything that's like drama and reality and sickness and destruction based in reality is not.
No.
We want to get away from that. Too much of it in the world right now. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I'm not sure if I can answer your question, but I don't think there is a particular thing. I'll go back to the books because I think that's important to recognize that we're inching closer and closer to Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 than ever before, and I always thought that was dystopian future fiction that could never be. But we're crawling closer to the Handmaid's Tale and Fahrenheit 451 than ever before, and I never thought we'd be capable of it. But that's the thing, the less informed and educated people are, and there are radical efforts trying to define what is being taught to young children by parents rather than teachers. That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
And Dr. Zayas God, Miss Dan, yourself, I know that you teach, and so you, I'm sure, have strong opinions about this.
It's actually like that. I find all of this so fascinating. I'm covering also for the channel Shudder's other new series, Queer for Fear, and I brought up, you mentioned it, like about like wokeism, and like somebody made a tweet the other day about, I can't believe the new Hellraiser did this and that, and like everybody's like, does this guy not know who Clive Barker is?
Right.
Like,
I've been seeing a lot of that. A lot of people like, it's a big revelation that Clive Barker's gay. I guess if
I know.
News to you, and it means something, in a negative connotation, then pick another franchise.
No, I agree. I know Pete and I talked about this before, but I feel like it's a good question to ask now, because you just mentioned about like how there's people who are informing kind of the narrative and people who are informing society. In the 80s, when it came to movies, there was nobody bigger than Siskel and Ebert. And Siskel and Ebert show up. They've shown up. I believe you've included clips of them in the other two.
They're the mascots. I'm fond of inserting them at strategic points. Yes. And they appear in ISOD 3 as well.
Yeah, and in the clip you sent us, it's like, Gene Siskel starts by going, it's my least favorite time to go to work where I have to review a horror movie. And Pete and I were joking around about how crazy it is today, how like almost accepted horror has become as a critical darling, especially with the works of Ari Aster and Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele,
24 stuff, Hereditary.
Yeah. And those were the voices that were the loudest to the general public in the 80s. So just like, how much do you think they contributed to the overall negative feeling towards horror in the 80s? Because when I was growing up, like one of the first things I ever really wanted to do was be a film critic more than be a filmmaker. I just loved watching movies and talking about movies. And these two guys are just the universal standard. And here they were on national television telling you that like, you're a bad person if you like this crap.
Yeah.
And so like, how much do you think they really played a role in the overall negative perception of horror in the 80s?
I think that's a great question. Context is everything, first and foremost. I mean, I show just a moment. I want to keep it in context so it doesn't show them negatively, but they did say these things and this is how they felt. Like if they said something negative and they said, but it's still a thumbs up, I didn't want to reflect them only negatively about something. But they're essentially like the Muppets, the Statler and Waldorf, off in the corner, just sort of making snide remarks and laughing to themselves. But I think what happened was, especially with some of that element that you just described, where they just dread going to work to see, crap like this or whatever the specific wording was. I think that was more in response to the slasher movement, which was they were singling out very specifically as singling out violence to women, just for the sake of violence to women. And so collectively, they were just like, I'm tired of seeing movies like this because it's tiring. They couldn't see past the genre and what the genre might have had to offer that we all sort of recognize more these days. Did it affect the genre at all? No, because look at us now. Back then, though, I think it surely did. I mean, when Ebert calls The Thing the barf bag movie of the summer, yet Siskel was like, what? It's like a really well-constructed film. People are paying attention to that. And they're like, I don't want to see the barf bag movie this summer. And The Thing tanked at the box office. And I would not be surprised if there was a direct correlation between their reviews and people opting not to go see The Thing on opening weekend because of Siskel and Ebert. So they surely did have a real effect on movies and movie going. And because they were really the only game in town. People really, really listened to them. But I would say the majority of people who weren't watching them on TV, they opened up the paper on a Friday saying, what am I going to see this weekend? They'd look at the pictures, they'd see what's playing nearby, they'd go or they wouldn't. And that was their deal. I think maybe horror was affected ever so slightly, but it did not matter because horror has always been great box office. And producers always follow the almighty dollar. And so when it doesn't matter what, if a critic calls something absolute trash, if producers see, you know, whether it's Halloween or Friday the 13th or American Werewolf in London making mega dollars, they're going to say, I want to do something exactly like that. We're going into production tomorrow and we're going to put out a film in 6 months to a year and we're going to reap the rewards and get it on video and all the stuff like that. So I think they were very, very influential, but when it came to horror, they were a little bit tougher on it. But you could also look, one last thing about it is that, you know, they would disagree on something like Motel Hell. You know, Motel Hell, just from the title on down, you'd think they would completely dismiss that. But I think, again, back to Ebert, Ebert said, this movie, I think there might be some genius here, you know, but you got to look for it. You got to recognize it, you know, and he, in the same breath, he put down, it's not like trash like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is something that's got something on its mind and it's a satire of that kind of stuff. And I think it might borderline on genius. Well, that's something coming from Roger Ebert about a movie like Motel Hell.
Well, speaking of genius, David, every time that you're on our show, you refer to past events. Like you quote people from your interviews, you quote people from they're on TV in the 70s and the 80s and things like that. For these documentaries, can you kind of let us behind the scenes and let us know, like, do you have like a whole team of people just essentially researching this stuff in general, or are you kind of guiding them as far as, I remember this quote from Siskel and Ebert, they were talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you go find it, or like, are you assigning people specific tasks, like to find the kind of media that you need? How does it work behind the scenes? It's all you, huh?
Listen, I will, before I even answer, we have an amazing team. And it's a team effort. But when it comes, and that's everything from the creativity of the pre-production, you know, the ideation of all this stuff, to the production itself, the post-production, the marketing, the manufacturing, the distribution, the social media, the community. We have at Creative VC an amazing team, and it all starts from the top down with Robin Block and how he wants these things to be. But in the same token, it's really, really great. And also a lot of these interviews, like this time around, you know, Rocco Thompson did a lot. He's a producer on the new film. And he did a lot of the heavy lifting with interviews and conducting interviews, because I was finishing In Search of Tomorrow. Okay. So he was helping with the outreach, lining up these interviews, sitting down with a lion's share of them. You know, we'd work together on exactly what he'd be covering, what they'd be asking, but he's incredibly capable and is a great interviewer. And so I had complete faith that I could say, we're good. Don't forget to ask this. I'm glad you're asking this. Go, here we go. You do that. We'll prep the next one. We'll find someone else. I got to finish this other film completely, get it out the door. Looking back at In Search of Darkness, part 1, 2, and 3, it's me. I mean, I choose all the movies at the end. You know, you guys give me a pile of movies to choose from, but I'm the one who's saying, these are the ones that fit in the year. We'll cover these. Let's go find talent to get it, to talk about it. I work with Sam Way, our amazing editor. I'm kind of all over the map with this answer, because there's so much that goes in my head when it makes one of these things. But
it's okay. I'm usually all over the map when I ask the question, so we're all
yeah. You know, I mean, just fundamentally with what you are seeing on screen, once we have determined all the movies that we want to include in an installment of In Search of Darkness or Tomorrow, I kind of do a mathematical equation of how much it's going to fit. You know, I'm like, if we're going to do 4 to 5 hours, we can't have more per year. You know, there are years where there's more and there's less, and I try and keep it all even. But there are some, just in terms of the trends of the movies, as you get later 80s, there's just more of whatever genre you've got, and they're more well known, and there's more to choose from. And so sometimes I lean more heavily on movie segments, you know, from 86, 87, 88, 89. That being said, and once we get our interviews and we get our talent, what I do is I script this top to bottom. So I say, if we're going to be talking about, I mean, what have we just talked about? We're going to talk about the hand, you know? So who do we get to talk about the hand, either from the movie or about the movie or both? You know, what's the collective celebration of this film? What are the nuggets of behind the scenes information? You know, what's a good anecdote? What's funny? What's serious about it? What's tragic about it? How do we get to tell a good, comprehensive story in about 3 or 4 minutes and then move on to something else? You know, and I script, I take all the bites. Is this boring? I don't know.
Not at all.
No,
Not at all. I'm eating this shit up. Taking all the bites. I'm taking them.
Okay. So is this, you know, you take all the, you know, we have a transcription thing. All right. So you take an interview, you put it in the transcription. Everything is time coded. I can find anything I want with a search. So if I want to type in hand, anytime anyone in that interview mentioned the hand will pop up. I can go straight to that nugget of conversation. I could listen to it. I could find the best moments of it. I literally cut and paste that dialogue and the time code when it was. Then I give that stuff to Sam Way. Sam Way will string all the people talking about the movie in, you know, just a stretch of talking heads and how it all comes together. Then I check the flow. Is this a good conversation? Does this complement this? Is this redundant? Does this move the conversation forward? Is this really superfluous, or does it have anything to do with it? Is this funny? Is it sad? Is it good? Is there an emotional punch to it? We fine tune it, and I hand it back to Sam, usually with next to no notes. I might say, make sure when they reference the book of the hand, I want you to use this book, you know, cover and this art. So I'll give that to him. Or, you know, when they talk about this, I want to make sure that you include this one key scene that best reflects what they're talking about. But for the most part, Sam will just comb through the film, put the best things, the best clips that he thinks make sense. I will embellish with other elements where if they make a reference to something else, I'm like, use that clip from that one movie that they mentioned, use that Siskel and Ebert moment because I think it's good. I will find it myself. You know, we put it together, and if it flows, we fine tune it, you know, we're on to the next. But what happens is when we put everything together, we say, all right, that works in context with everything. We're good to go, fine tune a couple shots, maybe get it a little tighter. Oh, maybe we can now have time because we have less later. We can add a little more. That one bite I wanted to add that I didn't think we'd have time for, we can now put that back in. Next thing you know, you've got 4 to 5 hours of conversation about 80s horror. I don't know. Is that interesting, or is that the most sleep-inducing description of this? I don't know.
I'm fascinated by, like, I can't edit a YouTube video. Pete does all the editing of our YouTube videos,
and I can't even edit those. So yeah, we're screwed.
So like, I'm fascinated by, especially a project of this length, and with this much material, taking from this many sources. You know, again, maybe it's the history teacher in me. It's like, to me, it's like putting together like a research paper, and it just works. I enjoy listening to you talk about it. Now, you did say one of the questions that you guys have when you're putting it together is this funny? I was glad to see Caroline Williams because she provided some of the highlight moments in Search of Darkness 1 and 2. And just on that note with the 80s horror, I got a chance to meet Jackie Kong twice over the last 3 days.
Really?
I went to Forbidden Planet in Manhattan for she was signing her new comic book, and I wore my Blood Diner shirt, and she was great. And then she did a Q&A at the Alamo Four Blood Diner Sunday night, and I saw that, and she's just so funny. And I saw her in, I believe, part 2.
Yep.
And movies like Blood Diner, and another one that I saw in the clip you sent us, Terror Vision. I feel like they don't make these, and like movies like that, movies like Killer Clowns. There was just something going on in the 80s where they made these just total oddball movies. Like, what do you think it was, aside from maybe certain substances? What do you think it was that led to like this just string of just completely oddball films that came out that have become such cult classics that we all love?
I think the thing is with horror is an incredibly flexible genre. You know, there are a lot of subgenres to horror, and I think it straddles a lot of different, subgenres within one film itself. But I think a lot of these filmmakers have a great sense of humor. And there's something to be said about when the blood is flowing and overflowing to, make it tongue in cheek, because then it's much more palatable. You don't focus on the gallons of blood. You focus on the humor of the situation that caused the gallons of blood. Evil Dead 2 is maybe the first movie that I saw when I was growing up that told me that this is not scary, this is funny, but it could be scary too. But at the end of the day, this is entertaining and hilarious and uproarious and scary at the same time. And it's the definition of a roller coaster ride. Reanimator, lots of humor. I mean, come on, it's like half the movie is a head looking for its body, It's just like, or the other way around. But it's like, I think it's one of the key reasons why we collectively love this genre so much. Microwave Massacre, it's like, killing people and stuffing them and eating them as just a description. It sounds like Jeffrey Dahmer. It sounds awful, but done in the right way, it's a society satire, and it's a laugh riot, and for the people who don't understand the genre, I think some of this comedic approach to some of these films, like the Kyoto Brothers, Critters and that kind of stuff, and Killer Clowns, I think it helps ingratiate people who don't get the genre that well, to kind of soften the blow, for some of the violence. It's just like, my wife doesn't get it. She doesn't get the blood and guts and all the violence, and that's what she sees. And that's how she's wired. She loves all sorts of other stuff. She's very open-minded. It's just not her cup of tea, but there are certain people who just can't get beyond that to even want to sit down and watch the whole thing for context and the big picture to understand it better. They don't care because they can't get past the first couple minutes of violence and gore, and arguably, if you're Siskel and Ebert, violence against women, which is a very legit and validated approach to a lot of the exploitation that occurred in this decade. All that stuff that we kind of dismiss because we've seen it so much. There's no tiptoeing around that there was violence against humanity in all sorts of forms, in this decade. But it's all about how you recognize it and place it in its context.
Yeah, I agree, and I have one more question. I don't know if Pete, because I wanted to ask you, before we ask you to, plug the movie and how we can support it economically and financially. Many people are looking at this year right now, 2022, as one of the greatest years of horror in terms of all content. From movies, you have revitalizing of franchises, and you have just this girth of original horror that has been just coming out so much. Plus, you have so much streaming stuff. What is, just to take your mind out of the 80s for 1 second, what's your favorite piece of 2022 horror that you've seen so far this year? Uh, because it's just been, I'm just continually blown away every time I see something new this year.
I am woefully behind on a lot of the great stuff because I, as for my job, have been living La Vida Loca in the 80s, and 80s horror. That doesn't mean I don't watch stuff that's contemporary. But I've seen few and far between. I haven't seen it, but I really can't wait to see Barbarian. Don't say anything else. I just hear it's nuts and it's great. That's all I need and that's all I want. I'm not even going to watch the trailer. I really connected with Malignant as well. And I think Malignant was really great in that it was polarizing because I had a very hard time with the first 3 quarters of Malignant because I was just like, this is what's special about this.
Exactly.
And I really pushed myself to stick with it in the hopes that something was going to be true about what people were saying about it. They're just like, you just got to see it. You just got to see it. I'm like, I don't see it. It seems so derivative and cliche. And then, I won't even say it, but
Yeah.
I was rewarded. My patience was rewarded. And now I absolutely champion that movie because it's nuts.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're living in a golden age, and the more the merrier, whether it's on the big screen or whether it's streaming on certain networks. I will be in the theater for Halloween Ends. I can't wait, at the end of this week.
Yep.
Lots of people, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but lots of people were very disappointed with the last Halloween. I was more disappointed with Halloween 2018. So when I saw Halloween Kills, I was like, I don't know what the fuss is. Michael Myers is in Haddonfield killing a bunch of people and Laurie Strode's freaking out. What else do you need? This is great. I think I don't hold my standard any higher anymore because you can't recreate the original Halloween. They've tried many, many times. It always goes back to that one and only 1978 John Carpenter film for me. But I'm happy to relive pieces of it in a big screen. And the fact that how many years later, how many decades later, it's just like, is it 40 years later? We're 40, what? No, 50.
From Halloween, it's
1978, do the math.
44 years now? 42? I'm really bad at math.
44 sounds right.
Yeah. But point is, the fact that we're getting fresh Halloween movies with a lot of the original talent and just the original location. Come on, how fun is that? How could you complain about that? What are you complaining about? Like, your complaints are misplaced, in my opinion. And if you're not happy with it, that's cool. Don't go see the final one. You don't have to trumpet to everyone else that you should avoid at all costs because you hate the others. Anyway, don't ruin everybody's fun. It's spooky season. It's in theaters. It's also on Peacock if you don't want to go see it in the theater. How cool is that? There you go. That's my answer. How about you guys?
Oh, Danny, go ahead. This is your alley.
I will not spoil Barbarian at all, but it's good.
You just do that. Do the Cisco and Ebert thumbs.
I've just been. I think if I had to name a number one of 2022 right now, it would probably be Pearl.
Okay.
I was just so happy to see Ty West back making horror movies again, and I genuinely blown away by how much I enjoyed Terrifier 2. I did not expect to love it. I expected to think the kills were great and that was it. But I genuinely ended up loving it. And even at close to 2.5 hours, one of the longest slasher movies you'll ever see, it held up pretty well. And I would definitely recommend that. We've been going almost 50 minutes, David. We appreciate your time so much. Do you want to just tell everybody how they can financially support In Search of Darkness 3?
Yeah, 80shorrordoc.com is the place to go between now and Halloween. Halloween is the cutoff, Halloween at midnight. And you go there and you can get your physical copy of In Search of Darkness Part 3. And if you missed Part 1 or Part 2, or you want to get the trilogy because you don't have any of them, you could buy the trilogy and a cool slipcase to hold it all together. We've got the things we normally do, the posters, the digital download, the soundtrack download. Do this now and you get your name in the credits. It's the only time you could do that and get your name in the credits. And this becomes a memento. This becomes like a part of your collection where you could say, my name is in this, or my podcast, or a loved one. And I shepherd this thing over the line, and I supported indie filmmaking. I get a freaking 5-hour In Search of Darkness movie. How cool is that? And my name is in it. There's one other cool thing that's super cool that we're doing this year or this time around. And I mentioned the community element dictating all the types of films that are in this installment. I wanted to give back to that community in another way as well, in addition to just helping choose what's in this film. I want you two, both of you guys individually, to do it, and everyone listening, you can record a video testimonial of why you love horror, why you love 80s horror, why you love a film or a filmmaker, or why even the In Search of Darkness franchise has impacted you in some way. What I want to do is during these end credits, which can go quite some time, I can't promise every single one, but I'm going to put as many as I can. And I'm going to have everyone in the community talking about why this matters and speaking from the heart. And I think that really encapsulates what these movies are all about. And the way you could do that is you go to our socials at 80s Horror Doc. You go to Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. On the link tree, that you'll see there's a thing you can click where it'll tell you exactly how to submit your video and what to do and all the parameters and so on. If you get a Google form, just type in your Google password, you get right to it. I think we're going to get rid of that by the time you hear this, but I think that's my way of incorporating all the fans and and what this means to all of us. And I think that's kind of a cool thing to do.
Yeah. I can't wait. I don't know if you can make it out, but I have parts 1 and 2 on top of my Michael Myers lunchbox. So
that's awesome.
I'm going to get, I can't wait to get part 3. I can't wait to see it. Do you have, what's next? I mean, you can't do In Search of Darkness 4. I mean, you can. Let's be real. There are so many. Pete and I, joking around, like, have found titles on Tubi of 80s horror movies I've never heard of, and I'm just I'm trying to get Pete. I'm trying to convince Pete to do a review of L.A. Age Jabber because I just found out that movie exists, and I'm like, come on. But what is next after In Search of Darkness 3? Are we moving to the 90s? Are we going back to the 70s? Are we going to another genre like with Tomorrow? What's next?
Well, I was going to say, next thing is I'm going to sleep well, and then I got to go see Barbarian. I also want to put in Orphan First Kill. That one I got to see as well. I haven't had the time to see these, so I'm kind of playing catch up. Although I am watching lots of horror movies for spooky season. I got a cool Hammer 20 film set, watching some deep cut Hammer movies, and that's bringing me lots of joy.
Yeah.
What's next for the franchise is, this is it. This is it for the 80s trilogy, but we want to do In Search of Darkness 90s next. And so we're planning on doing that. That's in very early pre-production and development right now. I would say it's in development, not pre-production. That's what's next. I'm working on a film called Aliens Expanded. I'm executive producing that. That's being directed by Ian Nathan. And that is a deep dive look at James Cameron's Aliens. And anyone who wants to go to aliensexpanded.com, they could sign up and track that and find out what's going with that film. That's expected in about a year, but they're doing a whole year of events with the whole Alien fan community in the meantime while we make this film. And I don't know what's next, but we're thinking maybe In Search of Tomorrow 2 is next up to bat for me. I'm looking forward to doing that. Robin is talking about doing that next. And it remains to be seen. No announcements just yet, but that's kind of what we're looking at.
I love the In Search of Cinematic Universe. It is wonderful.
Exactly.
It is wonderful.
Thank
Uh,
you.
well, David, thank you so much for coming back. Thank you for giving us so much time, and we love having you on the show. Whenever you get to In Search of Darkness 90s, In Search of Tomorrow 2, we'll have you back on again. And if you need more talking heads in the documentary, here we
Uh-huh.
are.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And
I appreciate you throwing your hat in the ring. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure chatting with you guys. You guys are keeping the flame lit, and I always appreciate you spreading the good word about these films and just about the genre in general. It's super cool. You guys are the real deal, and people recognize that, and so that's super cool. And keep doing what you're doing on your end. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
David.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. Well, we'll see you then for next time.
All right.
Cool. All right. Cool.